In my last video, I promised to introduce the concept of identity-oriented architecture as a methodology to strategically transform your cybersecurity posture from the ground up. This is what today's subject is about. I'll preface today's discussion with the note that the way this methodology uplifts cybersecurity is not entirely obvious. In general, we humans tend to seek solutions closer to the problem. For example, because people have difficulty remembering passwords, they solve the problem by using simple passwords and reusing them. Because simple passwords were easy to crack and to prevent reuse, companies implemented minimum complexity and mandatory rotations. This brought back the problem of having difficulties remembering passwords, so people reached out to password managers, and so on. Like a yo-yo, the industry keeps gravitating around the problem, fixing one thing only to break another, then fixing that in turn. To escape this trap, we need to stretch our mental comfort zone. Let me take you back to the story of the three little pigs for a simple analogy. If the first little pig were to be a tinkerer, like most engineers are, and provided he got a second chance, his natural tendency would have been to try to figure out a way to fix straw. In retrospect, we all know straw is just a poor choice of construction material, but that is because we all know the story. But as with people, to the first little pig, switching his construction material to stone would have been too big of a stretch, which is what we're going to do here. Identity-oriented architecture doesn't fix shared secrets. Like rock versus straw, it changes the nature of the building. In fact, in today's video, I will deliberately use shared secrets for two reasons. It helps keep things simple and focused on the architecture, and because everybody uses shared secrets today. Sticking to shared secrets will make it more relatable how we can start transitioning to an identity-oriented architecture, because what is more important for today's topic than what I am using as means for authentication and access control is what that thing represents. In a credential-oriented architecture, the shared secret represented the account. In an identity-oriented architecture, it represents the agent of action. If this is your first time on this channel, I strongly recommend watching the previous videos which make the case on why an access control system based on information about the point of business is the straw in cybersecurity. This will be an important part of the context here, as I will refer back to those aspects, but I will skip the explanation. Another important characteristic to consider is that identity-oriented architecture is not a tool. It does not directly solve the problem. It is what I call a higher-order solution because it has 2, 3, or more degrees of separation between itself and the acute problem we target. What happens instead is when we apply such higher-order solution, it causes a ripple effect that makes the acute problem disappear. Let's go back to the three little pigs. By using rock as a construction material, the third little pig still had to build its house, and during construction it faced some rock-specific challenges it had to overcome. But in the end, when the house was done, the wolf never emerged as a problem. So let's see how we can pull that trick in digital space. A lot of this is going to be a play with perspectives. So you might find some things to be disturbingly simple, but don't be fooled. Perspective is very important in digital space because here we create the world and we create it how we see it. If we see it wrong because our perspective is wrong, then the world ends up being wrong too, like it is now. Something as simple as perspective can end up having a profound effect on the end result. Let's say I have a database in my production environment. Doesn't really matter what database it is. For the purpose of this discussion, they all work the same. To access the database, I will have to create an account, which is where access control perspectives will start to diverge. This account is often called a user, especially in the non-SaaS world, but I find that misleading. I know this is semantics, but semantics matter. And based on that, it is wrong to say I'm creating a user, because clearly I am not doing that. A user is somebody or something that uses the database. At this stage, I am only creating the means for that user to access the database, and I don't want to confuse the means of access with the entity itself. I am only creating the account, so I will stick to that terminology. The way things are constructed now, this first account will be a root or superadmin, whatever it's called, but essentially anybody accessing as such will have complete power over the database. In a credential-oriented architecture, what we have pretty much everywhere It is perfectly normal to call this account admin and then use it from various places and by various people for administrative purposes. This is precisely the type of perspective that we need to unlearn. I've shown in my previous videos how accessing a service as a role is devastating from a trust perspective. It basically hides the agent performing the action. So this is the first thing I'm going to change in my transition to an identity-oriented architecture. The premise of an identity-oriented architecture is to have identities, artifacts describing the agent of action, not credentials, artifacts describing the point of service or the account, which an admin credential clearly is. Instead, given that I am the one setting up the database, I will call this initial user Stefan. I warned you that this will appear disturbingly trivial in places, but let's just think about it for a moment, what this actually signifies. In today's digital world, I cannot use anything of me personally to access an account because things are not set up that way. But I can make things personal and mimic the properties that are otherwise personal and unique in the real world, and using my name as a label to the account does just that. Something as trivial as how I name the account can become the seed of a higher order solution. There is a Latin saying, nomen est omen, name is destiny, which shows just how fundamental meaning is to human cognition. The way we name things defines behavior, and in this case, it defines how I am going to use that account, and that changes everything. If I name the account admin, I don't have a problem sharing those credentials with you as a fellow DB admin. But if I name it Stefan, I'd be very, very reluctant doing that, because if you do something wrong, then it's going to be my name in those logs. The number one prerequisite in an identity-oriented architecture is to never ever share credentials. Each credential must be absolutely unique to an agent. This is necessary as part of modeling uniqueness in a world of copyable credentials, and giving semantic charge to naming conventions not only helps, it's defining. Now, if I want you, as a fellow DB admin, to access the database with similar privileges, I will create you another account with your name and the same access rights. This simple change has huge benefits from a cybersecurity perspective, while it costs practically nothing, not financially at least. In fact, it is going to save you a lot of effort and money. For example, if you want accountability in a world where the admin credential is shared, you will have to paste that together from logs. By correlating access control with time of usage, the IP address DHCP assigned to each admin's computer at the time, for which you need lots of comprehensive logs. Furthermore, if you happen to have a proxy between clients and the DB, you now have to trace the routes, because the DB will always see the proxy as a client. And if by any chance the answer is that neither IP accessed the DB, rather some rogue device, you have no idea which of us gave the admin credentials away. It's deniable. All of this requires expensive tools, and it's massively labor and compute intensive. If, on the other hand, we decide to assign individual admin accounts, such tools are good but not absolutely necessary, because the IP address will mostly just reinforce the information that was already available as part of me using my account. If the logs show activity that I haven't performed, then it's pretty clear that I misplaced my access information. You are automatically exempt. It is undeniable because actions point to a person, not a collective. At this point, we're getting even deeper into identity and access control lifecycle, because in the event of such a credential mishap, the immediate action would be to change the password to prevent any potential intruder from continuing their misdeeds. Now, setting up a system which enables legitimate owners to effectively hunt down and lock out an intruder impersonating an admin while maintaining access is quite difficult. The ownership of the service itself comes into dispute. So I won't go down that rabbit hole here, but I will pick this subject up in a future video. I will now focus on what happens if the password is changed, which is part of the normal lifecycle, not just incident response. In case of the shared account approach, changing the password has an immediate and profoundly disruptive impact. The moment I do it, I effectively immediately revoke access to any other peers accessing the database with the same account. I basically make you lose access. This is deliberate, because I want the potential intruder to lose access, and in this model, it's the only way to do this. It's a huge side effect. This may be acceptable in case of an incident, but as part of the normal identity lifecycle process, it is not. And it is in fact the number one reason why passwords, API keys, and other credentials rarely, if ever, get rotated. On the other hand, if we were to use identity-oriented means of access, information aligned to the individual, not the database, if I were to rotate my password, that would have absolutely zero disruption with respect to your ability to access the database and continue your work as needed. It even doubles as means to create redundancy. Essentially, what I have done here is a very simple twist to the identity and access lifecycle, but which brings profound improvements, even at this tiny scale. Instead of creating one account which is centrally managed and shared by multiple users because they do the same job, I created two accounts with the same privileges, representing individual users and owned by the users. The contextual separation and the independence the parties enjoy with respect to ownership of identity completely unblocks the lifecycle process. If I happen to change departments, a classic example of corporate access management, all the company needs to do is to disable my DB account, not change the password for everybody. It's liberating. Scale this up for a medium-sized company to a few tens of people managing a few tens of tools, and you start getting the picture of how much effort you save. But this is a tricky thing. It's not just about saving effort and money. It's about setting yourself up for success or failure. What usually happens is that because of the effort you need to invest down the road to do these things and the collateral impact, you won't do them. That creates technical debt, introduces vectors of attack, becomes a blocker for compliance, and you generate contention between security and other teams. It's just a lot of unnecessary waste heat. I've chosen to begin with this admin example because it is strongly connected to the human world and it feels personal. And in this context, personal is exactly what we're looking for as part of the transition to an identity framework. Identity is personal, and we are going to make it personal for machines too, but we need to overcome some mental barriers. In my experience, there are two reasons why organizations avoid this approach to admin access. One is trust, and the other is operational. From a trust perspective, there is a perception that admin rights do not really belong to people. So by keeping account names in the realm of teams, creates a sense of retaining some control. This, however, is a misleading perception. By sharing access instead of giving access, we end up ceding control but not responsibility, which falls in line with the actions ending up not being clearly auditable. Shared responsibility is never good. If I have the right to do something, I should be accountable for my actions, and for that, it is much healthier for the organization to see my account as my admin account as opposed to an admin account. We can do that effortlessly if we switch to an identity-oriented nomenclature. From an operational perspective, the argument is usually around the transitional process. There is a sense of stability and continuity to having one admin account, as opposed to continually creating new ones for new team members and disabling old ones for people who moved on. This is relatable, but again, we stand to lose a lot more than we gain by doing this. People tend to equate stability with lack of change, but that is rarely an achievable state. A much better way of seeing stability is to have observable and controllable changes, which one continuous admin account is not. It is not only that it can quickly become an observability nightmare, which hinders control because there is no way to control something you don't see, but it's also operationally limiting. It is much easier to automate things when information is readily available, and an account named after a person contains a lot more usable information than an account named admin. Something as trivial as being able to create naming conventions becomes a goldmine for operations. This transition from shared admin accounts to individual admin accounts is not a radical novelty, but I wanted to start with something familiar. This recommendation is a well-known security best practice and a common pattern in many security standards, like NIST. Yet in spite of that, it is rarely observed outside highly regulated environments, so it is still a significant problem we need to overcome to transition to an identity-oriented architecture. What is new, even a bit strange in today's discussion, is the mindset. The reason why I am naming the account after the person is not just to have different accounts with different names for the sake of all the security reasons you'll find in the best practice rulebooks. Instead, I am naming them so to make them very personal, as close as possible to the user's identity. I want to make the admin feel that they're not just carrying around a key to access places they're allowed to access. Instead, I want them to feel that this place validates and remembers their identity. Of course, the way digital space is currently built, I can't really tie access control to the person's identity. That would mean there has to be some way to locally store something uniquely describing the person instead of the account, a framework that is not yet supported, but I don't really need it. Social dynamics comes to the rescue. What's more powerful in this context than information describing the entity is the reason why that information is used for access control in the first place. During identification, not authentication, we rely on specific information about the client that they can neither change or share. And we do that precisely because this makes it attributable. It makes people responsible for their actions. It enforces accountability. In digital space, I can achieve the same results by strictly tying the means of access control to the client. If you have experience in larger organizations, you might notice that single sign-on adheres to this model quite well. With it, people are seen as carrying something of theirs from system to system, instead of just carrying a bunch of access credentials to disparate, localized places. What's challenging is that tools like databases are rarely compatible with any type of single sign-on, which is why more than 80% of organizations, including big ones, use shared credentials extensively. The reality is, at this stage, we're still in credential world. We're using credentials in a certain way to emulate identity, and it will take several steps until items align in such a way that it will be unambiguous that access control is based on information about the client instead of information associated with the database. You fight this by becoming maniacal about not sharing credentials, which is not easy, because in an organization's journey, you will find all sorts of reasons why you would share credentials between different entities. You need to develop a muscle around resisting credential sharing and everything that is associated with it. For example, you can start moving away from secrets management tools. Try finding solutions of how to keep secrets safe without secret management. This is possible because in an identity-oriented architecture, even when you use secrets for identity, you will always have one secret per entity, and that secret should always be with the entity, never in a centralized store. Whereas the whole purpose of secrets management is to store secrets in a centralized place so you can securely use them in common between entities, which is practically a contradiction in terms. Before I wrap up, let's do a summary of the hacks I am using to facilitate the #1 rule of an identity-oriented architecture to never share credentials, while staying for now in the human sphere. I am creating individual accounts for individual people, even if that seems like more work, leveraging single sign-on where possible. I am naming accounts after people, using their names, to create a strong sense of ownership, exclusivity, and accountability in people with respect to the accounts they use. I am ditching secrets management and transitioning the responsibility of secrets to the client entity, conceptually making them part of their identity. It's a small step, but a necessary one, because in the next episode, we will try to apply this principle to the non-human space, which is a lot harder, because not only do we have to move credentials as part of the identity of the agent, but we literally have to invent the identity also, because we don't have a natural identity there as we do with people. For this, I will be introducing a new concept next time, which I call identity as a code, that will help us formalize the identity in the machine space. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and if you resonate with the principle of leaning towards identity and accountability in digital space, please subscribe to the channel and help spread the word. I believe this is how we turn cybersecurity more human, more natural, and more aligned to complement us, not work against us. You can also click that bell to get notified about my next video. Thank you for your time.